Imagine waking up at 2 a.m. to the sound of someone trying to break into your home. That's exactly what happened to the Wilson family last summer. But they weren't surprised. They were ready. In the dead of night, 52-year-old Richard Parker crept across his neighbor's backyard, crowbar in hand. For 6 months he'd been making the Wilsons' lives a living nightmare. Little did he know, they'd been expecting him. As Richard jimmied the back door lock, motion sensors detected his presence. Suddenly, floodlights blazed to life, illuminating the yard like daylight. The alarm system blared. Panic spread across Richard's face as he dropped the crowbar and frantically scrambled to escape. In his haste, Richard failed to notice the nearly invisible tripwire the Wilsons had strategically placed. He went down hard, face first, into the freshly watered garden bed. The security cameras captured every humiliating second in perfect high definition. What would you do if your neighbor tried to break into your home? Hit subscribe now, because you're going to want to see exactly how this decorated Marine veteran turned the tables on his racist neighbor in the most brilliant way possible. So who exactly are the Wilsons, and how did they end up in this unbelievable confrontation with their neighbor? Major James Wilson spent 15 years in the United States Marine Corps, earning 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star during his tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. As a logistics and security specialist, James developed an analytical mind and unflappable demeanor. Friends describe him as the calmest person in any crisis, a man who speaks softly but plans meticulously. His wife, Tasha Wilson, balances his tactical thinking with diplomatic finesse. As a hospital administrator at County General, she manages hundreds of staff members and volunteers twice monthly at the community center. Tasha was the first to suggest moving to Oakwood Estates, enchanted by the tree-lined streets and excellent schools. Their son Marcus inherited his father's cool head and his mother's social intelligence. At 17, the varsity basketball star is already fielding college recruitment offers, but it's his passion for technology that would prove crucial in the conflict to come. Marcus had been building and programming computers since he was 9 years old. And then there's Zoe, their brilliant 12-year-old daughter. A science prodigy who won the state science fair with her project on environmental sensors, Zoe notices everything. Her habit of documenting neighborhood interactions in her observation journal initially seemed like a quirky hobby. No one realized how important those detailed notes would become. The Wilson home stands as a testament to their hard work and discipline. A stately colonial with perfectly maintained gardens, an American flag and Marine Corps flag proudly displayed on the front porch. This wasn't just any house. It represented years of saving, planning, and dreaming. All they wanted was the American dream. Instead, they got an American nightmare living next door. Bookmark: Richard Parker had been the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association president for 8 consecutive years. The 52-year-old insurance executive considered himself the unofficial guardian of community standards. When the moving truck pulled up to the house next door, Richard's reaction was immediate and telling. "Are you sure you have the right address?" he asked the movers, clipboard in hand, not even attempting to hide his disdain as James and Tasha stepped out of their SUV. The harassment began almost immediately. 3 days after moving in, a code enforcement officer knocked on their door, claiming they'd received a complaint about unkempt landscaping. The officer apologized when he saw their immaculate lawn, admitting someone had sent photos of a completely different property with the complaint. When James installed security cameras, standard procedure for a security specialist, Richard marched over, demanding they be removed because they invaded his privacy. The cameras didn't even point in the direction of his property. Then came the parking complaints. Despite the Wilsons and their guests always parking legally, Richard took photos of every visitor's car, reporting violations to both the HOA and local police. When Marcus had teammates over to study, Richard confronted the teenagers in the driveway. "We don't usually have so many people coming and going in this neighborhood," he told them, emphasizing people in a way that made his meaning unmistakable. Property values are a delicate thing. The situation escalated when the HOA suddenly revised their guidelines for home improvements, just weeks after the Wilsons submitted plans for a back deck. The new rules specifically prohibited the exact materials and dimensions the Wilsons had proposed. The Wilsons responded with patience and professionalism. James suggested meeting for coffee to clear the air. Tasha brought homemade cookies to HOA meetings and volunteered for community initiatives. Then came the garden incident. Richard's German Shepherd somehow got into their fenced backyard and destroyed Zoe's prize-winning science experiment garden. When confronted, Richard claimed the Wilsons must have left their gate open, despite security footage showing the gate securely latched all day. The dog had clearly been let in deliberately. Seeing her daughter in tears over the destroyed plants, something changed in Tasha's approach. Bookmark UE5. The annual Oakwood Estates Summer Barbecue became the defining moment in their neighborhood nightmare. As families mingled on the community green, Richard Parker's voice carried deliberately across the crowd. "I don't understand how they afforded that house," he said loudly to a group of neighbors, glancing pointedly at the Wilsons. "Must be Section 8 housing or some kind of special assistance program." The implication was clear. Richard couldn't fathom that a black family could legitimately afford to live in his neighborhood without government help. What Richard didn't know was that James Wilson's military pension, combined with Tasha's executive-level hospital salary, meant they had qualified for their mortgage with a credit score higher than almost anyone else on the block. James, who had endured IED explosions and firefights without losing his composure, felt something snap inside. Not in anger, but in clarity. As he watched Richard performatively questioning their financial status, a calm realization washed over him. This wasn't going to get better through talking, James later recalled thinking. Bookmark. That night, the Wilson family held a meeting around their kitchen table, the same way James had conducted mission briefings during his military career. They faced three options: sell the house and move, continue trying to appease an unmovable bigot, or implement a strategic response that would protect their family while exposing Richard's behavior. "We're not moving," Tasha said firmly. "We earned this home, and I won't let him push us out." Marcus agreed. "If we leave, he wins, and the next family that looks like us will face the same thing." And so Operation Home Defense began, with each family member taking responsibility for a different aspect of their plan. This wasn't about revenge, it was about protection and accountability. Have you ever dealt with a neighbor from hell like Richard? Drop a comment below and tell us your story. James drew on his military logistics experience to develop a comprehensive security protocol. He sketched their property and identified vulnerable entry points, lines of sight, and strategic sensor placements. Tasha activated her network, discreetly meeting with other HOA board members who had witnessed Richard's behavior but had been too uncomfortable to speak up. Meanwhile, Marcus upgraded their home security system, installing additional cameras with night vision capabilities and motion sensors that would trigger both recording and notification. The teenage tech prodigy designed a system that stored footage both locally and in encrypted cloud storage. Perhaps most surprising was Zoe's contribution. The young science enthusiast created what she called her observation journal, a detailed record of every interaction with Richard, complete with weather conditions, exact timestamps, and witness names. Richard thought he was dealing with people who would eventually break or leave. He had no idea who he was really messing with. Mark 9 kg. As the Wilsons quietly fortified their position, Richard's behavior grew increasingly brazen. Security footage captured him walking slowly past their windows at night, cupping his hands against the glass to peer inside. On 3 separate occasions, Marcus's cameras recorded Richard leaving notes in their mailbox. Violations of federal law that the postal inspector would later find very interesting. The security upgrades James implemented weren't just standard equipment. Drawing on his military experience, he installed a comprehensive system that included perimeter motion detection, infrared cameras disguised as landscape lighting, and a silent alarm option that would alert the family without tipping off an intruder. In Afghanistan, we learned that sometimes it's better to observe hostile action than to immediately deter it, James explained. Evidence gathering can be more valuable than prevention. While James secured the physical perimeter, Tasha built a community alliance. She discovered that several neighbors had grown uncomfortable with Richard's behavior, but feared confronting the powerful HOA president. During casual conversations at the community pool or school pickup line, Tasha would gently ask, "Have you noticed anything unusual about Richard lately?" The floodgates would open. "He's always been difficult," one neighbor confided. "But something's different now. He seems obsessed with your family." As summer turned to fall, Richard's behavior became increasingly erratic. When Marcus had friends over for a study group, Richard confronted them in the driveway, demanding to see student IDs and questioning whether they belonged in the neighborhood. Most alarming were the multiple police reports Richard filed alleging suspicious activity at the Wilson home. Fortunately, the responding officers quickly recognized the baseless nature of the complaints. One officer, after his third visit, unofficially warned James that Richard seemed to be building toward something. James nodded, unsurprised. "He's going to try something stupid soon," he told Tasha that night as they reviewed the latest security footage. "And when he does, we'll be ready." Just 2 nights later, their security system recorded Richard testing the latch on their backyard gate, carefully examining the lock before disappearing into the darkness. James recognized the behavior immediately. Richard was conducting reconnaissance. October 17th, 2:14 a.m. The Wilsons' exterior cameras captured Richard Parker emerging from the shadows between their houses. He wore dark clothing, gardening gloves, and carried a crowbar partially concealed under his jacket. What Richard didn't know was that he had already triggered the first layer of the Wilsons' security system. The moment he crossed the invisible perimeter line Marcus had programmed, silent alerts were sent to each family member's phone. The security footage shows James calmly rising from bed, checking the live feed on his phone, and nodding to Tasha, who was already dialing 911. "We have an intruder attempting to break in," she whispered to the dispatcher. "We've identified him as our neighbor, Richard Parker. He's armed with a crowbar. We have 4 cameras recording him right now." Meanwhile, in his bedroom, Marcus activated the home's internal recording systems while Zoe, instructed to stay in her room with the door locked, began documenting the time and details in her observation journal. Outside, Richard approached the back door with surprising confidence. He tested the handle first, locked of course, before positioning his crowbar against the doorframe. As he applied pressure, he remained unaware that every sound, every movement was being meticulously recorded from multiple angles. James moved silently through the house to the security panel in the kitchen. With the calm precision of a military officer, he monitored Richard's position on the display. His finger hovered over the exterior light controls as he watched Richard work the crowbar deeper into the doorframe. "Wait for it," James whispered to himself, the discipline of his military training evident in his patience. Evidence first, deterrence second. On the security monitor, Richard gave a forceful push with the crowbar. The door's lock mechanism began to give way, exactly the evidence James was waiting for. He pressed the button. Instantly, the backyard erupted in blinding light as high-powered floodlights activated from all directions. Richard froze, crowbar still wedged in the door, momentarily paralyzed by the sudden exposure. In that moment of hesitation, James unlocked and swung open the back door, standing face to face with his neighbor. "I wouldn't take another step, Richard," James said, his voice eerily calm. Richard's expression shifted from shock to panic as he realized not only was James awake and waiting for him, but behind James stood Tasha, phone in hand, clearly on a call with authorities. Upstairs, bedroom lights showed Marcus and Zoe were awake too. additional witnesses to his criminal act. I thought I saw someone trying to break in, Richard stammered, still gripping the crowbar. I was coming to help. With a crowbar? James asked, pointing to the tool still wedged in his doorframe. And wearing gloves on a warm night? Richard's eyes darted from side to side, looking for escape. He took a backward step, then another, before turning to flee, only to trip over the garden hose that James had strategically repositioned earlier that evening. He sprawled face first into the mud of Zoe's replanted garden. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Richard attempted to scramble to his feet, but James's voice stopped him. The property line you're so concerned about is behind you, Richard. If you cross it before the police arrive, that's fleeing the scene of a crime. I wouldn't recommend it. When officers arrived 4 minutes later, they found Richard sitting defeated on the ground, James standing calmly in the doorway, and the entire incident captured from multiple angles on high-definition video. As the officers handcuffed Richard, one of them discovered something disturbing in his jacket pocket. A folded manila folder containing printed pages of information about the Wilson family. Their work schedules highlighted and annotated. Property records. Loan information that should have been private. Photos of their children with their daily routines noted in margins. As Richard was escorted to the patrol car, James stepped onto the lawn, looking directly at his neighbor for the first time without any pretense of politeness between them. You spent so much time worrying about us bringing down property values, James said, that you never realized the only problem in this neighborhood was you. The legal consequences for Richard Parker came swiftly and severely. He was charged with attempted breaking and entering, criminal harassment, stalking, and possession of burglary tools. The folder of surveillance information was particularly damning, demonstrating clear premeditation. At his arraignment, the prosecutor presented the Wilsons' meticulously documented evidence: 6 months of organized incidents, time-stamped video footage, and Zoe's detailed journal, which the judge specifically commended for its thoroughness. When Richard's attorney requested bail, the judge denied it immediately. News of Richard's arrest spread through Oakwood Estates like wildfire. The HOA board called an emergency meeting where Richard was unanimously removed from his position as president. As neighbors gathered, something unexpected happened. People began sharing their own stories of Richard's intimidation and manipulation. During this time, a real estate attorney who lived in the neighborhood made a startling discovery. Over the past decade, Richard had been quietly purchasing homes on the block whenever they went up for sale, then reselling them selectively. Documents revealed he had explicitly told a real estate agent that he was trying to control the neighborhood character. The sweet justice continued to unfold. Humiliated by her husband's actions and arrest, Richard's wife filed for divorce. Their house, the largest on the block, went up for sale as part of the divorce settlement. In a twist that could only be described as poetic, the home was purchased by a black family, a surgeon and an architect with 3 children, at significantly below market value due to the circumstances of the sale. When Richard was eventually convicted and sentenced to 18 months in prison plus 5 years probation, James was asked by a reporter if he felt vindicated. "This was never about vindication," he replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes people think they can push you out or break your spirit. But when you stand your ground with dignity and preparation, justice has a way of finding its path." 1 year later, the Wilson family was thriving in Oakwood Estates. Tasha had been elected as the new HOA president, running on a platform of inclusivity and transparency. James volunteered with the Neighborhood Watch, teaching residents about home security and community safety. And Zoe? Her science project on community resilience, measuring and building neighborhood cohesion through crisis, won the state competition and advanced to nationals. The project featured anonymous data from their own family story, analyzing how communities either fracture or strengthen when faced with prejudice. The Wilsons' experience led to concrete changes in their community. The HOA adopted new anti-discrimination policies with real enforcement mechanisms. A community review board was established to handle complaints and ensure rules were applied equally to all residents. The lesson was clear: standing up to racism requires strategy, documentation, and community. The Wilsons hadn't just protected themselves, they had transformed their neighborhood. As for Richard Parker, upon his release, he moved to another state, his reputation and career destroyed by his own actions. The surveillance folder he had compiled, intended to intimidate and control, had instead become the evidence that freed an entire neighborhood from his influence. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about staying put and thriving exactly where someone wanted you to fail. Have you ever dealt with discrimination in your neighborhood? Share your story below. And if this video helped you understand how to protect yourself from harassment, hit like and subscribe for more stories of everyday justice.